Welcome to Brussels, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here in the European Research and Innovation Days. You should all be here with me. Unfortunately, COVID prevents us from all being together. I'm Sandrine Dixon de Clèves, and I have the esteemed honor of both being the chair of this session with my co-chair, Francisca, who I will introduce to you in a second, and but also the chair of ESIR. If you don't know anything about ESIR, ESIR is the new think tank of DG Research and Innovation, looking at the economic and societal impacts of research innovation. And it couldn't be more relevant today as we're facing the convergence of tipping points between a health pandemic, climate change, and clearly biodiversity loss. And what we really have tried to do to work at ESIR is to look at a resilient Europe, to combine emergency action and systemic transformation, and to see how we can assist in the recovery by looking at protecting, preparing, and transforming Europe. And I have with me 4 very esteemed members, actually 5, apologies, I can't see everyone at the same time, 5 esteemed members of the ESIR expert group who work with me during the year, but we are more than 20 working together to try to understand how we can truly assist the European Union in looking at true new transformation and innovation. With me is Kirsten Dunlop of the EIT Climate Kick. And Kirsten is the CEO of Climate Kick. Just say hello, Kirsten. There she is. Also, Céline Chavirria, Executive Director of the Institute for European Environmental Policy. Céline?
Everyone.
Pierre-Alexandre Ballon, who is the Professor of Economic Geography at Utrecht University.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Pierre-Alexandre. And then Andrea Arenda, Senior Research Fellow and Head of Global Governance at CEPS, the Center for European Policy Studies. Welcome,
Hello,
Andrea.
Hello, Francisca. Hello, everybody.
So my partner in crime today, as we move through this very important work that we've been trying to do and where we want to truly include you, is Francisca. And Francisca is a student in university and has been a very active part of our discussions in the ESIR group. Welcome, Francisca.
Hi, hello everyone.
Good to have you here. I'm going to give you a little bit of an update of what exactly we've been working on, and then I will open up with some key questions with Francisca to the group. What we've been trying to do, as I indicated, is very much look at how we can bring in the people, planet, and prosperity element of research and innovation into transformative change. So protecting people, planet, and prosperity, preparing better for the next crisis, and then transforming society, economy, and regenerating the planet. And I want to take you to the State of the Union address that was pronounced by the President of the European Union, actually in the European Commission last week, because this is incredibly important and sets the stage for the work that we've been doing. And also, luckily, we can see that she's taken some of our key ideas within her speech and her thinking. The first is that we have to make change happen by design. As she very much indicated, not by disaster. That we need to emerge stronger by creating opportunities for the world of tomorrow. Innovation, transformation is truly what we need, and we need to build on what we've seen through the COVID pandemic as a way to better understand how we can actually transform. We have to propel Europe forward, not backwards. Business as usual scenarios, and you will hear from Pierre-Alexandre and Andrea, are not part of the way in which we can build back better. The European Green Deal is our blueprint to make this transformation, not only in terms of what is green, but clearly also social and economic impacts. This is about systemic modernization of our economy, society, and industry. And we've been working through ESIR to look at what that impact looks like. How can we bridge systems? How can we look at the integration between research at the university level, research on the ground, and actually innovative transformation within urban centers, within regional centers? How can we bring in institutes who are looking at research and ensure that together we optimize the impact for change? The virus has shown us clearly the limits of a model that values wealth above well-being. The work of this group and the work clearly of the European Union as we move forward is to see how we can transform our economic systems to better service people and planet and ensure prosperity. What I think is so important as I close this particular opening is that we need to remember that if we look at research and innovation, we are looking at collectively how we can enable the lives of people and livelihoods. And this is the message of the president that we received last week. This is not about self-serving propaganda. This is about answering the call of what matters, whether it be the health pandemic, whether it be answers to climate change, or whether it be answers to biodiversity loss and ecosystems disasters. I'm just going to quickly take you through this particular slide, which looks over the lessons that we have tried to bring forward and to think about in terms of protection. We have to take stock of the COVID crisis, and we need to rewrite the future. This came out of our report that we actually released in May. We have to draw lessons from the policy responses of local and national governments, and Kirsten will in particular give us some insight into this, and also in the breakout session that we will have later today at 4 o'clock. We have to step up the horizon scanning and the foresight. And we have to ensure that we start to look at crisis mapping and potentially even set up a crisis map. And then we have to develop rapid response capabilities. This is through industry, which you will see in the speech and the insight given by Andrea, but also digitalization, but also the way in which we bring our communities together. With regard to prepare, what do we need to do to prepare? Promote coherent, resilient, enhancing investments. Protect jobs. That should not equate to bailing out companies of yesterday, but actually helping companies of the future and of tomorrow. Increase public R&I investments. Direct public and private resources to finance system innovation, because if we're going to shift our economic system, we also have to shift the underpinning finance system. Pursue reforms to safeguard knowledge-intensive companies. And I will conclude with transform. What did we see as what we needed in terms of transformation from research and innovation? We have to look at a co-creation of a common 2050 sustainability vision. This means bringing citizens on board, bringing policymakers at all levels, and ensuring that business and the research community is all together. We have to ensure citizen engagement and a social dialogue consistently to ensure that communication is of the essence of what we're trying to do and bringing citizens on the journey. Implementing Horizon Europe in a way that facilitates on-the-ground experimentation and optimizing digitalization and AI for people. One of the key areas where we will see that Kirsten will start to open up for us is this fostering of resilient cities and rural communities. So I will pass it on to you, Francisca, to give a little bit your view of how we've gone through this process. From a youth perspective, do you feel that we've hit the right criteria and a better understanding of where we need to go?
Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone, again. I should say that my work with ESIR has been very, very fulfilling, giving the perspective of young people everywhere and making sure we treat the youth as a sort of a connective tissue in public institutions just makes me feel very proud of what my generation, younger generations, have been doing. And when it comes to the COVID-19 crisis, while we know that many of the COVID-19 implications, such as the confinement-related psychological distress and social distancing measures, affect all of us, different age groups have experienced these impacts in distinct ways. With the gradual transition of government responses from the immediate crisis management to what our report focused on.
We've got
several...
Francesca, keep on going.
Okay, good. I was concerned for a little bit. As I was saying, several concerns are emerging, such as increasing levels of youth unemployment and what implications this rising debt will have for intergenerational justice, as well as threats to the well-being of youth and future generations. For young people, and especially for vulnerable youth, the COVID-19 crisis poses considerable risks in the fields of education, employment, mental health, and disposable income. While the youth and future generations will shoulder much of the long-term economic and social consequences of this crisis, our well-being may be superseded by short-term economic and equity considerations, which is not ideal because of the disruptive nature of the COVID-19 pandemic. It puts the ability of governments to act decisively and effectively under public spotlight. Difficult trade-offs concern the balancing of public health and economic considerations at the present time, and the allocation of large-scale economic stimulus packages across different sectors and different beneficiaries. In the context of aging population, which means most of the populations in the European Union as of this moment, considerations about intergenerational solidarity and justice have been permeating debates on social, fiscal, and environmental policy in different policy areas long before this pandemic even struck. These considerations will only gain further traction as the repercussions unfold over the coming months and years. And this permeation of the discussions is something we really try to focus on our report, because already prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, young people have been at the forefront of calls for longer-term perspective in policy makings and in building more inclusive and sustainable societies. For instance, as we have seen it, through a transition to greener economies, through Fridays for the Future. This proves that young people, as I said in the beginning, can and will act as a connective tissue in public institutions, decision-making processes, and public consultations to sort of bridge these short-term concerns and long-term objectives and build a more fair and inclusive policy outcomes and societal resilience. This is what we try to achieve and tell everyone in our reports, that governments now have a unique opportunity to build back better from the crisis and reinforce trust, not only trust from young people in younger generations, but from everyone, by ensuring that these recovery plans not only address the fallouts of the crisis, but they also take into account the well-being of current and future generations. So, as my partner in crime said just a while ago, they need to protect their people first, prepare for the next crisis, and transform the society, economy, and regenerate the planet all at the same time. This is what ESIR has been working on. And from my point of view, as a youth, this is exactly what we needed. This COVID-19 pandemic gave us such a big opportunity, and we can't go back to how things were before. By following this report and taking our ideas into consideration, we are giving governments the tools they need to make sure everyone will be in the same boat for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, so much. And maybe building on your last very important intergenerational push and also transformation, let's open it up now to our esteemed panel. Kirsten, do you want to look at the transformational innovation aspect of this and your reflections as to both the report and what you're seeing on the ground? We can't hear you, Kirsten.
Am I off mute now?
I hear you now. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think a couple of things. There's, first of all, let me explain a little bit about these reflections come from a process of learning over the last 2 years from a beta testing mode, working with cities, with regions, and with European member states on ways in which we might experiment with different ways of putting into practice research and innovation to respond to the scale and complexity of the kind of challenge that systemic modernization poses, as Ursula von der Leyen described it. And then, of course, dealing with the overlay of the COVID crisis and what that has meant in some of the leading cities and regions where we've been working. And the session that Sandrine referred to this afternoon is an opportunity, the ESIR breakout sessions is an opportunity to hear from, in 3 parallel sessions, some case studies in motion, if you like, of regions and cities and national level interventions that are really trying to do something different. I think the question of how we design ourselves out of the mess we're in and really respond and meet the people, planet, prosperity nexus of needs all at once, for a start, makes design a critical capability. Design approaches that are grounded in an understanding of needs, that convert that understanding into principles rather than fixed rules, so that we can respond to emergence and adapt as constant change happens to us. And that really leads us also to think about the fact that we are not going to design out of the mess we're in. We need to design for the mess we're in, because it will not go away. The COVID is the first of many. One would argue not necessarily the first. This sort of sense of constant permanent crisis is one of the things that the ESIR group has really reflected upon. And our need to design for that extent of complexity and uncertainty, and as Francisca said, the sort of crashing together of timescales from immediate emergency to what we know to be a much longer underlying emergency, and a need to solve for both. That means we really need to kind of shift our thinking, not from a focus, a tendency to look for individual solutions and sort of be satisfied or want to focus on them, look for the individual investable assets and bankable projects, but really look for creating the conditions that designs for multiple possibilities simultaneously and combinations of those possibilities, and particularly the combination of social change together with every single piece of technology, industry and infrastructure change we put in place. So that's almost literally a requirement, like a baked-in condition for the way in which we innovate. I think it means we really need, looking at the learnings that we have from the experience on the ground that you'll hear about later on this afternoon, we need to think about using innovation differently. We need to think about innovation as a mechanism that enables us to learn by doing. And something that I often hear described in research and innovation circles as deployment is what I would argue is the essence of the innovation we need. Rapid cycles of experimentation, an application on the ground, constantly fed by an injection of research and kind of new possibilities, looped in and structured with feedback loops and sense making that helps us extract from this innovation experience, testing multiple things at once. What combinations do we see as working? What information do we need for policy making? We need to understand that the purpose of innovation really ultimately is to change something that currently exists, and that ultimately that is changing ourselves. These are endogenous issues, not exogenous issues. We need to shift our own understanding of ourselves and our relationship with the planet. The people, planet, prosperity piece needs a really different reframe around the interdependence of people and planet. And COVID is if you like, a horribly ironic forcing function to help us get that particular principle. If humans are well and the planet is well together, and we have designed for and innovated for that interdependence, prosperity can follow, but it requires us to reframe a sense of almost a secondary order in relationship to those first two. And you can see it in issues around questions around the relationship between mental health, through lock-in and the ability to get out and just get into green spaces and rejig a sense of sanity and well-being. I think that ultimately comes to two things, and I'm just going to give an example of what does this look like if we try to put it into practice. Very much it comes down to a question of a capability. We often tend to focus in research on and innovation on the things, that the kind of the stuff that we make that might offer new solutions, when we know if we put it together, this complexity the constant crisis, the resilience we need really ultimately requires a capability for constant renewal and a capability for looking for properties of things. So if you think some of the examples that you'll hear about this afternoon, the opportunities that we can see now in rewilding cities and bringing a closer relationship between urban landscapes, rural landscapes into urban, rewilding cities, changing our relationship between the city and rural environments and with landscapes. It gives us lower emissions. It gives us better air quality. It gives us better physical and mental health in the forced redesign of urban systems. It gives us better biodiversity or rebuilds biodiversity. It gives us regenerative possibilities, not just zero emissions, but actually regeneration of the environment. And it gives us community cohesion and cohesiveness and systems security and safe food systems, if we think about a combination of urban farming and all sorts of things. So we're starting to think in terms of multifaceted elements of both business models, of social models, and of innovation that is designed for those combinations and ultimately designed for a deep interdependence of our well-being and the planet's well-being. And I think that's a lot of where we know we need our policy to go. In terms of systems transformation, we need some key shifts in the way our financial mechanisms, our policy mechanisms, and our governance mechanisms make a more systemic approach possible and make systemic modernization possible. One of them, in terms of finance, is around a much stronger fiduciary logic. This is about investing our funding, public and private, to manage a more stable transition into a decarbonized future than will otherwise happen if we let a series of crises overwhelm us.
Yeah.
And it's almost underwriting a more stable future. We need to incentivize collaboration much more explicitly than we have. This might be the time to question whether healthy competition actually serves us. We need governance that can hold the kinds of timescales that Francisca is referring to between young and current, that can hold multiple needs around commons that have a short and a medium and long-term logic. And above all, we need narratives.
I'm going to have to, sorry, I need to interrupt you so that I can enable some of our colleagues to come in as well, because time is running short. Thank you, though, and so true, and thank you for all those examples, in particular of what we need in terms of transformative innovation. And I want to move on to Céline, because traditionally, and this is a key question that we are having in ESIR right now, traditionally, most of our research was done in an academic format. We are now calling for totally different types of research, collaborations, innovation in a very different way and very active on the ground through deep demonstration. Céline, how do you see things?
Thank you, Sandrine. Thank you, everyone. I think when we look at, ESIR is putting a very exciting vision, I think, which is about Europe's 21st century moonshot, being about how do we make sure that everyone in Europe can have a fulfilling life while staying within planetary boundaries. And R&I has a key role to play in enabling this. And then, let's talk now about what would this look like in practice? What do we need to change in the way research is conducted to be able to reach that vision, to get to the moon, so to speak? So the first thing to say is really important that we ring-fence research and innovation as a crucial investment. As Kirsten just said, we are within a recession. There's a great risk that R&I, especially those investments that are for sustainability, will decline. We know that the private sector tends to reduce its R&I funding in recessionary periods. Can we get major companies to pledge maintaining their R&I investment for sustainability? The same risk applies to public budgets. So we feel that Horizon Europe has a very key role to play in terms of the role of an automatic stabilizer. We just also need to make sure that we're not planning for yesterday's crisis. So if we look at the 10 billion that was promised as part of the MFF on agriculture, rural areas and bioeconomy, one might say, well, we are in the midst of COVID. Let's no longer worry about this and let's redirect everything to health. I see that would be a mistake. We shouldn't plan for the last crisis, but for future ones. And we know that they will be deeply interlinked. The second thing, as Sandrine was saying, R&I needs to be at the heart of a systemic change, which means that we need to make sure that research projects lead to the emergence of novel sustainable practices. And here I'm not talking just about technology, it's about social innovation, governance innovation. Make sure that there's uptake within society, and that uptake leads to the reconfiguration of established systems. What systems are we talking about? Those that are essential for human needs and for well-being: nutrition, mobility, housing, and leisure. This means we need to change methodologies of research if we want to do that. It means combining multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, as well as transdisciplinarity. It also means we need to have a universal R&I agenda. If Europe tomorrow becomes an island of circularity in a world ocean of linearity, we will have achieved nothing. This also means that we need to be strong in terms of operationalizing directionality. And this is very much the vision of the Horizon Europe missions. They are like live experiments, and we need to make sure that as they are proposing and bringing together their ideas, that we make sure that they are being effective. Are they leading to innovation? Is the funding being aligned to the missions or not? And here I would like to highlight that if we look at Europe, only 10% of public research is funded by the EU. So where will the other 90% go? How can we promote directionality in terms of the use of public funding at the member state level? And last but not least, the last challenge, we need an R&I for and by the people. That means applied research and demonstration, rapid learning, reflection, including greater citizen engagement. And what I mean by citizen engagement is much more profound than what is usually the case right now within research circles, because it's about co-creating the agenda. It's about action-based research where NGOs, trade unions, churches, SMEs, communities, local authorities are seen as co-creators of innovators and not transmission gears of ideas that have been that have arisen among brilliant minds. Citizen science, the learning agenda to make sure that we benefit all citizens. And to finish, we need a deep social accountability. The citizens of Europe are counting on us, the knowledge sector, on us, the research and innovators of Europe, to provide a better future. So we need to be able to show how we've used the funds, how we have developed a co-created agenda, and how we will deliver better prosperity and well-being for them and protect them from future crises. Thank you.
I think you really have set forth the challenges that we have also in ESIR to look at this systems approach and unpacking the tensions between people, planet, and prosperity. I just learned yesterday in a Bloomberg report that actually the trillions of recovery money that has gone out, only 20% has gone into green and social investments. This is not right. And if I turn to you, Andrea, because Céline clearly indicated that industry is part of this, what do we look at when we're looking at value chains? How do we bring in industry to be the real future research and innovation champions that we need them to be to actually go between people, planet, and prosperity?
Thank you very much, Sandrine. That is obviously $1 million question, although $1 million is not much by today, right? So it's $1 trillion question, although we have today some digital companies that have gone way beyond that alone in terms of market valuation. I'm very happy to be at the Research and Innovation Days. I was a speaker also last year, and of course that was in person. I hope we can get back to really a large gathering of people after the pandemic, and so that this pandemic will unfold relatively quickly. What's the role of industry in all this? Well, ideally, the real solution to many of our problems are the global value chains, right? They have been poster children of the 90s and the 2000s, the idea that you could globalize production, tap into local knowledge and skills, involve in global production, developing countries, leads to convergence towards prosperity, and globalizing also the way in which we produce and consume, and so equalizing opportunities as well. I mean, that was really a promise that still stands to a large extent today. But unfortunately, things have not gone exactly the way in which we expected. To me, especially after the financial crisis, the idea of global value chains, the idea of GVCs, as we've been calling them for a long time, has gradually transformed from global value chains into global value capture, meaning that especially when things started to become problematic after the financial crisis, and also due to the deteriorating trust between countries around the world and the multilateral order and global trade, what we have seen is that, and this is confirmed by the statistics, in many respects, we've seen a rise of market concentration, rise of markups, a gradual concentration of value in the hands of the few, and a gradual deterioration of the real potential and power of the global value chains. This has happened at the global level. It has also happened at the domestic level. You see what this has meant in terms of the stability of jobs in the United States during the pandemic. The unemployment subsidies, the people on unemployment subsidies have oscillated in a horrible way. And this tells you also what is the relationship between efficiency-oriented ways of organizing production, things that we call lean production, just-in-time delivery, and the well-being of the people that participate in these value chains. This was not sustainable. And indeed, we can say today, also from the perspective of ESIR, that the international approach to global value chains has had a triple failure. It failed to protect workers and the planet. It failed to prepare. We've seen how unprepared we were for the pandemic. And it failed to transform the way in which we approach economic production in a way that will be more sustainable. Indeed, there is no state of grace to get back to. Global value chains were already broken in many respects before the pandemic. And there is something that we have to do to fundamentally transform our approach. The other important thing that we've discovered is that the global value chain approach in and of itself has nothing wrong, but it needs to be accompanied by additional structures in terms of our approach to capitalism, our approach to trade, our approach to incentives, our approach to solidarity along the value chains. Currently, things like the role of certification, the role of contracts, the different levels of bargaining power on the global value chains have led to exactly the opposite situation. This afternoon, we have a breakout session in which, for example, we explore the situation of digital labor platforms. We have Umarani from the ILO who will explain how the conditions of workers in developing countries have deteriorated, how their intellectual property has lost value over time. And this is a key problem. So where do we go from here? I think the key problem has been this governance structure on the value chains. This is what has failed really during the pandemic, and it's failed also within Europe, with Ursula von der Leyen devoting unbelievable efforts to try and keep the single market together, when member states were trying to find solutions that, in my opinion, are unfit for purpose, such as repatriating all the production or closing the borders in the face of a situation that really requires collective coordination. So my recipe for the future is not deglobalization, is rather reglobalization. If I had to say it in Spanish, it would be adelante con juicio. When we go forward, but by rewriting the rules. And my recommendations very quickly on the global value chains is really trying and restore correct incentives, moving from efficiency-oriented to resilience and sustainability-oriented value chains, from the value capture to move towards embedded solidarity and trust in global value chains, to diversify sources of supply to minimize the supply chain risks. So from purely cutting costs in the global value chains to more diversified sources of production and all the other intermediate levels, to embed the sustainability of global value chains in the bilateral and in the global trade agreements in the future, to the extent that this is possible, to refrain, unless we are talking about critical infrastructure, from protectionist stances. It's true that countries will try to build their own capacity in a number of respects. Think about personal protective equipment today, but there is no panacea in repatriating all the production. This will put the world on a third best chart and a third best path.
I'm going to bring in Pierre-Alexandre.
Yeah, and finally, let's engage in mission-oriented innovation policy. I think the Silicon Valley model that has been inspiring us, and to some extent, the European Commission over these years is not going to give us a suitable solution to solve the problems that we have in industrial production. We need to mobilize the public and private sector towards commonly agreed goal. And so this is my call also from the side of ESIR. Over to Sandrine, and thanks for having me there.
Wonderful, thank you. And I think some very key suggestions, in particular the triple failure. I adore the triple failure analysis, and I think we need to look at that very closely also in our work, and also the way in which we can really optimize through a new globalization vision the role of our industrial sectors across Europe. And I'm going to turn now to you, Pierre-Alexandre, because clearly part of our mission is to bring in digitalization as an optimization tool for people and for planet. I know you're going to focus more on people, but if you can give us your view of where we need to go next and how we can integrate that into some of our thinking.
Yeah, thank you, Sandrine. This is such an important question. I'm really glad that this is a question that we can fully address in ESIR in our discussion and today in these R&I days. And, I've been teaching machine learning, data science, network science for now almost 10 years. And I've really seen students moving from this kind of fascination to these technologies, this magic toolbox, into a form of fear, And this is why this is such an important question. And because COVID truly accelerated this digital transition, what was like an urgent question is really truly an emergency. So we need to address that. Now, before I get into like the big problem and big dilemma that we face, we have to also acknowledge that digital technologies also lead a lot of really good things and a nice prospect also for mitigating climate change. When it comes to with this pandemic, we also learn that sometimes we don't have to travel that much, because the travel was completely exploding over the past couple of years, with companies investing about the GDP of Spain every year into like international business travel. Now we are learning, because we've been forced to, that we can also have a lot of meetings online, and we can save in this travel. We also have this shift to remote work that can literally kill congestion and traffic in cities and literally open and pave the way for a much greener future. We've seen this R&I days also a lot of projects that build, on that leverage digital technologies for climate change, to mitigate climate change. So there are also a lot of opportunities there. Andrea was talking about value chain, and we can optimize value chain and traceability, access to better information. So they are really, really great things. Now, the big issue that I think we face, and I don't think we have a good answer for that now, so we need to have an open discussion on that, is that this digital economy, by nature, by design, is a truly winner-take-all economy. So as companies grow a bit bigger, they start to gather more data, make better prediction, and attract more customers, and therefore also get more data, make better predictions. So you have this kind of snowball, this kind of crazy snowball that emerge, where you have these tech giants that kind of occupy the entire space and have monopoly. Now the big issue is that knowledge consumption is very widely distributed. So I can consume Google products from here, but the knowledge production is becoming more and more concentrated. So at a worldwide level, you have this crazy, completely unprecedented in history, winner-take-all economy. Now, how do we address that at the European level? Because we know that this is a big problem. No, it's like, I don't think anyone could discuss this fact. Now, how do we go about it? Of course, the EU has been very active into trying to regulate that, being aware of the problem, trying to regulate. Now, this is a good first step, and that led us to create also an expertise in regulation and build some kind of trust around these technologies. But this is like a first step, because the future is not sustainable to think that we can fully address the issue by regulating tech giants from the US and from China. So the only way forward is to build a strong European digital economy, but based on a new system. As you said, not doing like business as usual, and we build the system by design, because the system we know is a winner-take-all economy by design. Now we have to think about what kind of principles, not only regulation, also like principles, can help us to build a better large-scale system, because we don't really have a choice. Like for these technologies to work, we have to have a large-scale system, but we have to make it also decentralized. And we do have this opportunity to bring a large European digital economy that will have strong decentralized components that interact. Now, in practice, what does that mean? That reminds me very much, we talk about moonshots. I come from Toulouse, southwest of France, headquarters of Airbus, where to me, what Airbus is a true large-scale European adventure, which builds on capabilities distributed in the UK, in France, in Germany, in Spain, all over Europe. But hold on, these European countries, they don't compete with each other. They don't try to get each their own, aerospace company. They all specialize in some key components, and then these components are integrated, and you create one of the best company. Maybe I'm being chauvinist because I'm from Toulouse, but this company is a true European success. And why? Because it's a large-scale system that can compete with Boeing, but building on decentralized elements. And this is the way we can look forward to build a strong digital economy that will also bring jobs to Europe. Because let's not forget that if we want to protect these jobs that we have now, we have to think that the new jobs that will be created in the future, most of them will also have a digital component. So we need to be very, very well positioned on that. And I was talking about my students at the beginning, but this is also a very big fear of them. Like, are we going to have jobs? Can we have jobs if we don't have a digital skills? So we need to address that and really have a true European vision. We stop with countries competing with each other into having their own AI champions, but we need to have AI champions at the EU level that build on decentralized elements and on strong EU values.
Thank you. Pierre-Alexandre, I'm going to interrupt you just because you brought up students, and I want to conclude with Francesca, who was supposed to be my partner in crime, but things went so fast that we actually didn't get to bring Francesca back in. Speaking of students, what is your final question or thinking around what we've just heard, Francesca? And how do you see the next steps?
Well, honestly, the COVID-19 crisis has been difficult for everyone. It has brought challenges for everyone, and I'll try to make this very quick because we're running out of time. But I think what we wrote, what we all thought about on this report is basically the next steps we should follow to make sure we are prepared for another crisis, if there is one. Let's hope not, but if it happens. And we need to focus on all these problems at once. And this is not going to happen unless we listen to the people who have some knowledge on all kinds of areas. This is the reason we had this session with these amazing people, and thank you all for being here and talking about all of this. And I'm sorry the time was so short that we couldn't ask more questions or hear more about everything you have to say, because I'm sure all of you could talk about 45 minutes about all the problems in each of your areas, and I could talk about it too. But let's hope that what we leave here today, and if people don't remember anything else from this session, I hope they remember that it's important to focus on progressive action from now on. Business as usual no longer exists, okay? Business as usual is gone. And as ironic as it seems, COVID-19 was the thing that slammed through the door and said, now it's time to change. And that's what we need to stop.
You're absolutely right. And so I'm going to close this session building on your very, very intelligent and wise words. Having been with actually Professor Goodall last night, a word that she keeps on repeating is the human species is supposedly the most intelligent, but definitely not the wisest. And what I responded is, let's make sure that we prove that the Anthropocene, this period of time that we are in, that we demonstrate that we are wise. What we're trying to do at ESIR is bring in the wisest thinking. You are all part of this approach. This is a citizen approach, it is a research approach, it is a business approach, it is a policy approach. And we open our doors, we will have further stakeholder engagement through ESIR over the coming few months. We have 3 breakout sessions this afternoon at 4 where many of you can ask your questions to Kirsten and Montserrat, who will be talking very much around the cities and the regions and the role of cities and regions in innovation. To Celine and Daria, who will be talking around universities and the importance of research research within academic arena, but also how we bring in other actors. And to Andrea and Pierre-Alexandre around the role of value chains in industry. The fact is, we cannot solve this mess unless we do it together, unless we look at the way in which we transform our own lives and also the way we function within our systems. And I believe that we can do that. ESIR is just a little part of the thought leadership that is happening. As president of the Club of Rome 50 years ago, Donella Meadows indicated already that we would have many crises. We would not just have one if the humanity continued to go past the planetary boundaries. This is the first of the health pandemics that have hit us all, and it will be actually, with the convergence of climate change and biodiversity, a continuum of crises. So we must plan, and we must protect, and we must prepare, and we must recover and transform. And that is how I'll leave this session, and I look forward to working with all of you. And thank you to my incredible panelists, members of the ESIR think tank. Thank you very much.